My daughter looked me in the eye at the airport gate and said, "You're not coming with us, Mom. It's better this way." Then she turned, smiling at her husband, and walked toward the jet bridge with her family. I stood frozen, ticket in hand, like a discarded suitcase that no one claimed. After decades of sacrifice, selling my home, funding her education, raising her child, I was now an inconvenience. But as their flight lifted into the sky, I reached for my phone, called my late husband's lawyer, and prepared to board a very different plane, one they never saw coming. My daughter's words still echoed in my ears as I stood at that airport gate, but my mind drifted backward, pulled unwillingly into the years I had surrendered piece by piece. I was 29 when Richard, my husband, collapsed at a construction site. One phone call shattered my world, leaving me with a funeral bill, a mortgage, and a 10-year-old girl named Charlotte, whose eyes begged me never to let go. That night, sitting at the kitchen table with my hands still trembling, I promised her I would give everything I had so she would never feel the emptiness I did. I didn't know then how far that promise would carry me, or how much of myself it would erase. The next morning, I put on a uniform I didn't have time to wash and reported for my first double shift as a night nurse. By day, I bagged groceries at Miller's Market, wearing a fake smile that never reached my eyes. There were weeks when I barely slept, dozing in the break room with my head against a vending machine hum. My hands cracked from constant sanitizing, my back bent from lifting patients heavier than me, but I never complained. Every blister, every ache, every dark circle under my eyes was simply fuel to keep Charlotte's world intact. She thrived. She grew tall, sharp-minded, ambitious. She wanted to be a lawyer, she said, and my tired heart swelled with pride. To pay for it, I sold the house Richard had built board by board, the one where his laughter still clung to the hallway walls. Signing those papers felt like amputating a limb, but I told myself it was worth it because when Charlotte walked across that graduation stage, she would carry both our names in her diploma. I thought that was how love worked. Give until you vanish, and one day your sacrifice will shine through someone else. There were nights I came home to nothing but silence. I'd microwave leftovers, sit at the wobbly kitchen table, and stare at the chair that used to be Richard's. Sometimes I'd write in my notebook, not about myself, but about Charlotte's victories. Won debate match. Accepted to internship. Scholarship still pending. My life had narrowed to bullet points in her biography. I told myself that was enough. When tuition bills arrived higher than expected, I borrowed against my retirement plan. When her car broke down on the highway, I drained the emergency fund to buy her another. I learned to live with the sound of my stomach growling so she could have full meals. Once in the dead of winter, the heater broke in my rented apartment. I wrapped myself in 3 coats and whispered, "This is nothing," as I transferred money for her bar exam fee. I was 60 by then, joints aching, but still sprinting between shifts. People called me resilient. I just called it being a mother. Charlotte's wedding was a lavish affair. White roses piled so high they brushed the chandeliers. Guests toasted her beauty, her career, her bright future. I sat at the corner table in a second-hand dress, clapping until my palms burned. No one mentioned me. Not the years, not the sacrifices, not the woman who had sold her husband's house so this girl could stand in satin. But I didn't mind, or told myself I didn't. "Love doesn't keep score," I whispered. "Love gives." By the time she had her daughter, Anna, my body was beginning to betray me. My knees swelled, my hands shook, and the graveyard shifts left me dizzy. Yet when Charlotte called saying, "Mom, we need help with childcare," I answered without hesitation. I sang lullabies at 3 a.m., bottle-fed Anna while Charlotte slept, and ironed her husband's shirts before work. I thought, surely now she will see me. Surely now she will say, "Mom, you matter." But recognition never came. Instead, requests piled higher. A down payment here, a credit card balance there. "Just until we get through this month," she would say. And I believed her. Belief was easier than admitting that perhaps I had raised a woman who saw me less as a mother and more as a safety net. Still, I clung to hope. I imagined a day when Charlotte would look at me with gratitude, maybe even remorse, and I would brush it away with a smile. It was all worth it, I'd say, and we would hold hands as equals at last. That dream kept me standing when exhaustion pressed me to the floor. So when she suggested a family trip, my heart leapt. "You'll come with us, of course," she said. I spent weeks planning, folding clothes, packing snacks like I used to for her school trips. I told the cashier at Miller's Market, "My daughter is taking me on vacation." Pride dripping from my tired voice. I thought it was proof that love, even delayed, still comes around. At the airport, I gripped my ticket so tightly the paper creased. Charlotte laughed with her husband, their matching luggage rolling smoothly behind them. She turned once, met my eyes, and for a second I saw the little girl who used to beg me not to leave for the night shift. My heart swelled, but then her words fell like a guillotine. "You're not coming with us, Mom. It's better this way." I didn't argue. My throat closed around every plea I wanted to make. The family walked down the jet bridge, their silhouettes shrinking. I looked down at my ticket, trembling in my hand. For decades, it had felt like a passport to belonging, proof that I was finally included. But now, I saw it clearly. It wasn't a ticket to somewhere. It was a ticket out. Margaret didn't know then that the boarding pass she clutched so desperately was only for one direction, and not the one she thought. The hum of the terminal seemed to grow louder after Charlotte disappeared through the jet bridge. Margaret stood rooted, her boarding pass damp in her palm, watching strangers shuffle by with excitement on their faces. Families hugged, couples held hands, children tugged impatiently at their parents' sleeves. She alone remained motionless, as if the floor beneath her shoes had frozen her in place. Her daughter had spoken the words so easily. "You're not coming with us, Mom. It's better this way." Like it was a harmless suggestion instead of a verdict. Margaret tried to swallow, but her throat felt lined with sandpaper. All the nights she'd worked until her feet bled, all the meals skipped so Charlotte could eat, all the years lived for someone else's tomorrow. They collapsed into that one moment of dismissal. Her body didn't shake with rage, it hollowed with disbelief. The betrayal wasn't loud, not a scream or a slap. It was casual, clinical, almost polite. And that made it burn worse. She drifted to an empty chair near the gate and sank down, her knees weak. The announcement board above her flickered with flight numbers. Gate attendants smiled and scanned tickets. She pressed the crumpled pass against her lap, as though willing it to transform into proof that she still mattered. But even the ink seemed to mock her. Seat 24C. A seat she would never fill. Her purse slid from her lap to the floor. As she bent to retrieve it, a cream-colored envelope tumbled out, one she didn't remember packing. The handwriting on the front made her stomach twist. "Mom." It was Charlotte's script, neat and deliberate. The same she'd once used to scrawl thank you notes that Margaret kept tucked in drawers for decades. With trembling fingers, Margaret tore it open. Inside were legal documents, pages thick with jargon and empty signature lines. At the top, power of attorney, authorization of transfer. Her daughter hadn't just left her at an airport. She had planted this, hoping her mother's loneliness, confusion, and desperation would coax a signature. Margaret's eyes blurred, not from age, but from a grief so sharp it cut through her chest. She pressed the papers back into the envelope and held it close, as if proximity might explain the cruelty. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text notification lit the screen. It was from Charlotte. "Please look over the documents I gave you. It's just a precaution, Mom. Nothing urgent. We'll talk when we're back." No apology, no acknowledgement, just a continuation of the betrayal, wrapped in legalese. Margaret sat rigid, her pulse pounding. She looked around the terminal again, at the happy families, and thought how easily hers had dissolved into a transaction. She wasn't a mother anymore. She was an asset, a ledger line, a liability to be erased with a stroke of her pen. A child's laughter broke the trance. A little girl darted past, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her mother chasing gently behind. Margaret's eyes filled as she remembered Charlotte at that age, running through fields, sticky with ice cream, squealing when Richard lifted her high above his head. She once believed those memories would anchor Charlotte to her. Instead, they had evaporated, replaced by paperwork and polite betrayal. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, she folded the envelope neatly, slid it back into her purse, and sat straighter. Her mind whirred with questions. What had she done wrong? Was she too giving, too silent, too trusting? Or had Charlotte always been this way, waiting for the right moment to reveal it? Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This one from Charlotte's husband. Don't stress about this, Margaret. Just think of it as making life simpler for everyone. You'll be taken care of. The words dripped with condescension. Taken care of. As though she were an old dog, shuffled from one yard to another until the end. Margaret inhaled deeply, the sterile airport air sharp in her lungs. She remembered Richard's last words when he was rushed into the ambulance, clutching her hand weakly. Promise me you'll never let anyone decide your life for you. She had thought he meant strangers, circumstance, illness. She hadn't realized he might have meant their daughter. Around her, the boarding gate emptied as passengers settled into the plane that was already taxiing away. The finality of it hit her, not just the plane leaving, but the life she had built, lifting off without her. She imagined Charlotte leaning back in her seat, sipping juice, chatting with her husband, relieved to have set her mother aside like one more obligation crossed off the list. Margaret's hands clenched on the envelope. She whispered under her breath, almost to herself, "You think you've left me behind, Charlotte, but you don't know me as well as you think." The bitterness in her tone surprised her, not because it was sharp, but because it was steady. The intercom above her chimed. Another flight was boarding, to a destination she didn't care about, but the sound made her heart beat faster. Something inside her shifted, a spark beneath the rubble of humiliation. She didn't know where she was going yet, only that she would not sit here forever, holding a worthless ticket while her daughter planned her erasure. Margaret tightened the strap of her purse and rose from the chair. She walked slowly, deliberately, past the crowds, the announcements, the glossy storefronts. She wasn't going home, and she wasn't following Charlotte. She didn't know the destination yet, but she knew she still had a journey left to make. Margaret's fingers brushed against the envelope again. The paper crackled like a taunt, but also like a warning. Betrayal had cornered her, but somewhere, in the distance, there was another path waiting. One her daughter hadn't seen. One Charlotte would never control. Margaret trembled. But she didn't know yet that another plane awaited her, a plane not bound for vacation, but for freedom. The airport felt like another planet. Margaret sat hunched on a rigid plastic chair, surrounded by the hum of rolling suitcases and muffled announcements, yet she might as well have been invisible. People streamed past, their voices rising and falling, their footsteps echoing. No one noticed the gray-haired woman with a crumpled ticket in her lap and an unopened envelope in her purse. She stared at the glossy floor, its surface reflecting strangers' shoes, but refusing to reflect her. Her body sagged as the hours crept by. She could no longer tell if the ache in her chest came from exhaustion, betrayal, or simply the weight of existing too long without recognition. Her mind wandered back to the nights when she'd eaten crackers in silence after double shifts, rationing food so Charlotte could have seconds. She remembered clutching a secondhand coat tighter against the cold because the heating bill had gone to cover tuition. She remembered scrawling grocery lists on napkins, calculating which meals would stretch farthest, while Charlotte studied late into the night. The memories hurt not because they were sacrifices, but because they felt erased. The world around her continued without pause, as though her decades of giving had evaporated into nothing. She wondered if perhaps she had been a ghost all along, present, but never truly seen. A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. She dabbed it away quickly, embarrassed though no one was watching. It wasn't the first time she had cried in public, but it was the first time she felt like crying was pointless. What good were tears when even her daughter, the person she had given everything to, had looked at her as if she were disposable? A voice cut through the haze. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you Margaret?" She blinked and looked up. A man in his late 30s stood before her, dressed in an airport uniform, badge clipped to his chest. He held a clipboard, but his eyes softened when he met hers. "Yes," she whispered, her voice uncertain. He smiled, tentative. "I thought it was you. You used to work at St. Mary's Hospital, didn't you? Night shift?" Her heart skipped. "Yes, for over 20 years. My son," he said quickly, his words tumbling over themselves. "He was premature. Tiny thing, you were there. You stayed by his incubator when no one else could. You kept telling us he would fight. He's 12 now, healthy, playing soccer. I never forgot your face." Margaret's chest tightened as warmth bloomed inside her, fragile but real. Someone remembered. Someone saw. For a brief moment, she wasn't a ghost. She was Margaret, the nurse who saved lives. Tears welled again, this time from relief. She nodded, unable to speak, and the man touched her shoulder gently before duty called him back down the concourse. She sat straighter after he left, her breath steadier. Perhaps she wasn't invisible after all. Perhaps her life had meant something. The thought glowed faintly in her chest like a candle in a dark room. Then her phone vibrated. She fumbled to answer, still buoyed by the encounter. The name on the screen made her stomach drop. Baker and Associates, the family law firm she had used for decades. "Margaret," the attorney's assistant said briskly, "I wanted to confirm that we received a request from your daughter, Charlotte. She's pushing for immediate transfer of several properties and accounts under your name. She mentioned you've already authorized it?" Margaret's blood ran cold. She gripped the phone tighter. "No, I have not signed anything. I never authorized that." "Then I suggest you act quickly," the assistant replied, her tone sharpened with urgency. "She's pushing aggressively. If documents are signed, it will be difficult to reverse." The call ended, leaving Margaret with the terminal noise rushing back in around her. The envelope in her purse seemed to grow heavier, poisonous. The papers weren't just hypothetical. They were already moving like claws toward everything she had left. Her hands shook as she pulled out the worn leather notebook she carried everywhere, the one filled with decades of scribbled numbers, paychecks, expenses, transfers to Charlotte, small notes in the margins, Charlotte's books, $250, Charlotte's braces, $1,800, Charlotte's first apartment deposit. Every line was a record of sacrifice. Every line was proof that her love had been turned into currency. She traced the entries with her fingertip, her breath uneven. The truth pressed down on her like a stone. Charlotte hadn't just left her at a gate. She'd been planning this betrayal for years. Each signature, each favor, each silent compliance, pushing Margaret closer to invisibility. But as Margaret turned the pages, her trembling slowed. For the first time, she didn't see the notebook as a log of loss. She saw it as evidence. Evidence of who she was. Evidence that she had given, relentlessly, fiercely, until there was nothing left. And now, perhaps, evidence that she had a right to take back her life. Margaret clutched the notebook to her chest as if drawing strength from the ink itself. Her daughter might have thought the story was finished, but Margaret knew better. She had one move left, and she was about to take it. Margaret tightened her grip until her knuckles whitened. She wasn't sure where the path would lead, but she knew it wouldn't end in silence at an airport gate. Margaret sat in the terminal long after the call from the lawyer ended, her fingers tracing the leather-bound notebook on her lap. She opened it again, pages yellowed and fragile from years of being handled. Line after line, entry after entry. Charlotte's braces, Charlotte's college tuition, Charlotte's wedding deposit. Every figure was accompanied by a brief note in her own handwriting, always ending with the same phrase, "For Charlotte's future." She lingered over those words until the letters blurred. The notebook that once brought her comfort now seared her eyes with a painful clarity. Her sacrifices had not been acts of shared love, but transactions Charlotte had absorbed without gratitude. Margaret realized with a stab of grief that what she had always believed was love had become fuel for her daughter's hunger. The affection she thought she was building had been translated into entitlement. Each dollar a brick in a prison she had constructed for herself. Her chest tightened, but instead of tears, something steadier filled her veins. Resolve. She closed the notebook, gripping it as if sealing away decades of misplaced devotion. Then she pulled out her phone and scrolled to a number she hadn't dialed in years. Baker and Associates. The line clicked after only a few rings. "Margaret," came the familiar voice, warm with recognition. "It's been too long." "Hello, James," she said quietly. "I need your help. Charlotte has moved against me. She's pushing transfers of property, accounts, all of it. I haven't signed, but she's prepared." A pause on the line followed by a sigh. "I warned Richard about this possibility once. He told me you might need reminding someday." Her pulse quickened. "Reminding of what?" "That you're not without resources," Baker said firmly. "Before he died, Richard made sure you had something separate, untouched. You never used it because you never asked. But it's still there." Margaret gripped the phone tighter. "What is it?" "His plane," Baker replied simply. "A small private jet. Richard bought it quietly years ago, insisted it remain in your name. He said if the world ever cornered you, that plane would take you somewhere safe." For a moment, Margaret couldn't speak. Images of Richard flooded her mind. His hands rough from carpentry, his laugh booming through their modest house, the way he had always tried to think 3 steps ahead. He had left her a lifeline, one she hadn't known she possessed. "I don't know how to fly," she whispered. "You don't need to," Baker said. "It's maintained, crew on call. You just have to decide where you want to go." Margaret's heart pounded in her chest. She looked down at the notebook again, at the final entry she had written years ago, Charlotte's bar exam fee. That had been the last time she logged a sacrifice. The years since then had been filled with demands, but she hadn't bothered to write them down. Perhaps some part of her had already known she had given enough. Now Richard's foresight stretched out before her like a runway. She could let Charlotte strip her bare, or she could reclaim the pieces of herself she had buried beneath decades of servitude. "James," she said, her voice steady for the first time that day, "I need to change everything. The accounts, the deeds, the will. Charlotte cannot control them. Not anymore." "You'll need to come in person," he replied. "Tonight, if possible." Margaret ended the call and sat back, the weight of decision heavy but liberating. She slipped the notebook into her purse and rose from the plastic chair, ignoring the stiffness in her knees. Around her, the airport pulsed with life, indifferent to her small revolution. Her phone buzzed again, a new message from Charlotte. "Did you sign the papers yet, Mom? Please don't make this difficult." The words burned, but instead of despair, Margaret felt a surge of cold clarity. She made her way through the terminal, following signs that most passengers never noticed, past the bustle of security lines, past the gates glowing with departures, until she reached a discreet entrance where a driver in a black uniform waited. He bowed his head slightly. "Mrs. Whitaker, the plane is ready." Her steps faltered. She hadn't heard that name spoken with such respect in years. For a fleeting second, she imagined Charlotte's face if she knew her mother wasn't abandoned and broken, but boarding a jet her father had left behind, heading not into silence, but into power. As she climbed the steps to the sleek white plane, Margaret pressed her palm against the fuselage. She could almost feel Richard's presence, as if he were guiding her up the narrow staircase. Inside, leather seats gleamed under soft lights. The hum of the engine vibrated faintly through the floor. For the first time in decades, she felt like she wasn't just surviving. She was choosing. Margaret sank into a seat by the window, clutching her notebook as the crew prepared for takeoff. Through the glass, she saw commercial flights lifting into the night sky, their passengers blissfully unaware of her story. One of those planes carried her daughter, laughing perhaps, relieved to be free of her mother. But Margaret knew better. Charlotte thought she had exiled her mother to loneliness. She thought she had secured the family fortune. She thought she had won. Margaret closed her eyes as the jet engines roared to life. While Charlotte soared toward a tropical vacation, Margaret was about to fly into a different storm, one her daughter would never see coming. The jet touched down just as dawn spread pale gold across the horizon. Margaret stepped onto the tarmac, the morning air sharp and bracing against her skin. The car waiting for her whisked her directly to Baker's office, a place she hadn't visited since Richard's funeral. The building hadn't changed. Tall glass windows, polished stone steps, the same brass plaque etched with his name. Inside, everything smelled faintly of paper and cedar, grounding her in the gravity of what she was about to do. James Baker rose from behind his mahogany desk when she entered. He was older now, his hair gone silver, but his eyes still held the steadiness she remembered. "Margaret," he said gently, guiding her to a seat. "I've prepared the documents. If you sign, every asset, properties, accounts, even residual investments, will move into a trust solely under your control. No one can touch it, not even Charlotte." Margaret lowered herself into the chair, her hands trembling slightly as she took the pen. For a long moment, she simply stared at the papers, the lines of legal text, the empty spaces awaiting her name. She thought of Charlotte as a baby, tiny fists curling around her finger. She thought of Charlotte on graduation day, waving proudly from the stage. And then she thought of Charlotte at the airport gate, eyes cold, voice clipped. "You're not coming with us, Mom. It's better this way." Her hand steadied. She signed, once, twice again, until the pile of documents bore her name in bold ink. The sound of the pen scratching paper felt like a quiet rebellion, each stroke reclaiming a piece of herself. When it was done, Baker closed the folder and nodded. "It's finished. Charlotte will have no legal claim." Margaret exhaled, the air rushing from her lungs as if she'd been holding it for years. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply felt lighter, as though a chain had been unlocked. That night, alone in a hotel room overlooking the city, she allowed herself a moment of memory. Richard's final day came back vividly, the ambulance lights flashing, his hand clammy in hers, his voice hoarse but insistent. "Promise me you won't let anyone decide for you, Maggie. Not even our daughter. You live your life." She had nodded through her tears, never realizing how much weight those words carried. Now, decades later, she had finally kept the promise. Weeks passed. Margaret left the city quietly, moving into a small cottage near a windswept beach town. It wasn't luxurious, but it was hers. The salty air, the rhythm of the waves, the chatter of gulls became her new companions. For the first time, mornings weren't dictated by someone else's needs. She woke to the sound of the sea, brewed coffee in her own kitchen, and sat by the window watching the tide roll in. But Margaret didn't retreat into solitude. Slowly, she reached out to the women in town, widows, retirees, mothers whose children no longer called. She offered to teach them recipes, simple meals she'd perfected over years of thrift and care. Soon, her kitchen was filled with laughter, the scent of fresh bread, the rhythm of knives chopping vegetables in sync. They called it Grandma's Kitchen, a place where stories were shared as easily as food. And in teaching them, Margaret found herself being healed. One evening, as the class wrapped up, a hesitant knock came at her door. When she opened it, she found a small figure clutching a folded piece of paper. Anna, her granddaughter. The child's eyes darted nervously, but her smile was steady. "Grandma," she whispered, pressing the paper into Margaret's hands. Margaret unfolded it to reveal a drawing. Wings, wide and strong, colored in bright shades of blue and gold. Across the top, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Grandma's wings." Tears blurred Margaret's vision as Anna spoke, her voice trembling. "I don't want you to disappear. Mom says you left, but I don't believe it. You're still here. For me." Margaret knelt and wrapped her arms around the child, holding her close. The weight of betrayal, the ache of loss, it all softened in that embrace. Someone still saw her. Someone still needed her, not for money, not for inheritance, but for love. "Thank you," Margaret whispered into Anna's hair. "You've given me back something I thought I lost forever." That night, after Anna left, reluctantly with a promise to return, Margaret sat at her kitchen table staring at the drawing. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in renewal. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't discarded. She was alive, and she was free. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Charlotte was laughing over cocktails by a hotel pool, certain that her victory was complete. She imagined her mother sitting alone in some dingy apartment, confused, powerless, waiting to be rescued. She believed the assets were hers already, that her careful manipulation had succeeded, but the illusion wouldn't last. The phone call that would unravel everything was already on its way. Charlotte was still intoxicated by triumph, still basking in her own cleverness, unaware that the ground beneath her feet was about to split open. Charlotte returned from her vacation bronzed and confident, dragging her designer luggage through the arrivals hall. Her husband carried their daughter's bags while she scrolled through her phone, already planning how to finalize the paperwork she had slipped into her mother's purse. She imagined Margaret waiting at home, weary and resigned, ready to hand over the last pieces of her life. Charlotte felt a rush of satisfaction. Soon, everything would be settled. The house, the accounts, the investments, it would all finally belong to her. 2 days later, she arrived at Baker & Associates with her husband in tow. She announced herself to the receptionist, her tone clipped with authority. "I'm here to finalize the transfers. My mother has already received the documents." She expected no resistance, no obstacles, only signatures and confirmations. But when the receptionist checked the files, her expression shifted. "I'll bring Mr. Baker," she said quickly, disappearing into the back. Moments later, James Baker appeared, folder in hand. He regarded Charlotte with a mixture of disappointment and cool professionalism. "Mrs. Harris," he began, using her married name, "I believe you're under a serious misconception." Charlotte frowned. "My mother has the documents. She knows this is the right thing. I'm here to make it official." Baker slid the folder across the desk and opened it. "It is official," he said calmly, "but not in the way you think. Your mother has signed everything into a private trust, completely sealed. Not even you can touch it." For a moment, Charlotte couldn't breathe. "That's impossible. She would never—" "She already has," Baker interrupted, his voice firm. "And it's irrevocable. You no longer have any legal claim to her assets." Her husband shifted uneasily beside her, his face paling. "Charlotte," he muttered, "what does this mean for us?" Charlotte's pulse hammered. Her carefully laid plans, the years of nudging and coaxing, the quiet confidence that her mother would fold, it all unraveled in an instant. She stormed out of the office, the sound of her heels striking like gunshots against the marble floor. At home, the cracks widened quickly. Without access to Margaret's accounts, their finances began to crumble. The vacation bills piled up, debts surfaced, and their lifestyle, once inflated by assumptions of inheritance, became unsustainable. Arguments flared nightly. Charlotte lashed out, blaming her husband, blaming the world, but never daring to admit the truth. She had underestimated her mother. Meanwhile, in a small town by the sea, Margaret's days unfolded with quiet joy. She walked along the shore at sunrise, taught her cooking classes in the afternoons, and welcomed Anna whenever she could slip away from her parents' house. Margaret's kitchen rang with laughter and smelled of fresh bread, and she felt more alive than she had in decades. One afternoon, as she left the market with a basket of herbs and bread tucked under her arm, Margaret heard her name. She turned, and there was Charlotte, standing on the opposite sidewalk. For a fleeting second, both women froze. Charlotte's eyes darted over her mother, her posture upright, her hair brushed by sea wind, her face glowing with contentment. She was surrounded by a group of women her age, all chatting animatedly, carrying baskets of produce, their camaraderie woven around her like a protective cloak. Margaret looked radiant, freer than Charlotte had ever seen her. Their eyes met. No words passed between them. There was no confrontation, no angry speech, no plea for forgiveness. Margaret's gaze was cool, distant, but not cruel. It carried no explanation, no defense, only truth. The message was unspoken but unmistakable. I am not yours to discard. I never was. Charlotte opened her mouth, but nothing came. For the first time in her life, she had no argument, no demand, no leverage. She felt the weight of absence pressing down, the absence of control, of wealth, of a mother she had once taken for granted. And then came the final blow. From behind Margaret, Anna appeared, clutching the same folded drawing she had once given her grandmother, Grandma's wings. The child slipped her small hand into Margaret's, smiling up at her with a love untainted by greed. Charlotte reached instinctively toward her daughter. Anna, come here. But Anna shook her head gently. I want to stay with Grandma, she said softly, her voice carrying across the street like a bell. Charlotte's heart constricted, her face draining of color. She had lost not only her mother's fortune, but her mother herself. And now, standing under the afternoon sun, she felt the terrifying possibility that she was losing her daughter, too. Margaret gave Charlotte one last look, steady, unyielding, but without malice. Then she turned, walking away with Anna and the women by her side. Her steps were measured, her silence louder than any words. Charlotte stood frozen, the world rushing around her, realizing too late that the woman she thought weak had risen higher than she could ever reach. And Margaret, she didn't need recognition, nor apology, nor victory declared. She had stepped into a life of her own choosing, where love came freely and dignity no longer had a price. The waves roared faintly in the distance as she walked away, carrying Anna's hand in hers, her head lifted to the sky. The reckoning was complete, and it was silent,